If you grew up hearing stories about the Great Depression, you probably heard about hunger, unemployment and hardship. What often gets overlooked is how brutal the winters were for families who couldn't afford fuel, electricity or modern heating systems. There was no central heat to fall back on, no instant space heaters from a hardware store, and no guarantee the next load of coal or firewood would come at all. Yet millions survived winter after winter. Not because they were tougher, but because they were smarter with heat. What they figured out in the 1930s still works today, and in many ways it works better than what we rely on now. What made Depression-era heating so effective wasn't bigger fires or more fuel. It was the understanding that heat should be controlled, stored and directed, not wasted. These weren't folk myths or desperate tricks. They were practical systems refined by necessity, passed quietly through households that had no room for inefficiency. The real genius was learning to heat people and spaces, not entire houses. One of the biggest mistakes modern homes make is trying to heat every cubic foot of air equally. During the Depression, that luxury didn't exist. Families focused on heating the smallest livable zone possible. Kitchens became living rooms because stoves were already burning for cooking. Doors were closed, unused rooms were abandoned for the season, and heavy fabric curtains divided spaces to trap warmth where people actually sat and slept. You can still apply this today by identifying one primary living area and treating the rest of the house as unheated storage during extreme cold. Thick curtains or even well-fitted blankets hung in doorways dramatically reduce heat loss. The physics hasn't changed. Warm air still escapes through open spaces first, and reducing the volume you heat immediately lowers fuel consumption. Depression-era stoves, were designed to extract every last bit of heat they could muster. Wood and coal stoves of the 1930s weren't decorative centerpieces at all. They were heat engines, plain and simple. Many were fitted with long flue paths, baffled interiors, or heat shields that forced exhaust gases to linger before exiting the chimney. The longer those hot gases stayed inside the stove or stovepipe, the more heat was transferred into the room, instead of just disappearing outdoors. A common technique back then was running stovepipe horizontally across the room before it rose into the chimney. This clever trick turned the pipe itself into a radiant heater. Now, modern safety codes often restrict this, but the principle is still valid, you see. Even today, heat exchangers and stove fans use the same idea. If you rely on a wood stove, adding thermal mass around it with brick, stone or masonry boards can store heat during burns and release it slowly, long after the fire dies down. The hidden power of thermal mass was well understood intuitively, even without all the science we have now. Depression-era homes often placed stoves near brick walls or hearths for a good reason. Brick absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly. A stove running for several hours would warm the masonry, which would continue radiating warmth deep into the night. This, in turn, reduced the need to keep fires burning constantly, saving both fuel and labour. You can replicate this effect today by placing dense materials near heat sources. Masonry, concrete, stone tiles, or even thick water containers absorb excess heat and stabilise indoor temperatures. This is the same principle behind modern passive solar homes, but it was already being used by families who couldn't afford waste. Bed warming was treated as a survival priority, not a comfort. During the Depression, staying warm at night mattered more than daytime comfort. People understood that sleep was when hypothermia crept in quietly. Hot water bottles, heated bricks wrapped in cloth, and even warm sandbags were placed at the foot of beds. These methods didn't heat the room. They heated the body directly. This approach remains effective today. Warming the bed space requires far less energy than heating an entire room overnight. Even in modern homes, focusing heat where your body actually is can drastically reduce energy use while improving safety in power outages or fuel shortages. Clothing and insulation were part of the heating system itself, you know. Homes were colder because clothing was heavier. Wool layers, thick socks, and insulated nightwear reduced the need for higher indoor temperatures. Walls were lined with newspapers, rugs were stacked on floors, and drafty windows were sealed with homemade solutions using cloth, cardboard, and wax. These weren't signs of poverty alone. They were deliberate thermal strategies, you know. Heat loss through floors and windows remains a major issue today. Simple insulation improvements still outperform many high-tech fixes when budgets are tight. After the war, cheap energy and mass production made inefficiency affordable. Central heating replaced localized warmth. Homes grew larger, ceilings higher, and heat loss became someone else's problem. What the Depression taught was forgotten, because fuel became abundant again. But abundance doesn't last forever. Rising energy costs, grid instability, and renewed interest in resilience are bringing these ideas back, not as nostalgia, but as proven solutions. The forgotten fire was never about flames. It was about control. Depression-era heating worked because it respected heat as a resource. It was captured, stored, directed, and conserved with intention. That mindset still applies today, whether you're off-grid, prepping for emergencies, or simply tired of wasting energy. If this deep dive into forgotten survival knowledge gave you something useful, subscribe to the channel for more historically grounded lessons that still matter. Share this video with anyone who values resilience, preparedness, and real-world wisdom pulled straight from the past.